Thank you for coming to today's talk. We're going to be talking about understanding COVID-19 stress, and we are Virginia Copes. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. My name is Kristen Tully. I earned my master's from VCU, and I'm currently the Deputy Program Director for the Virginia Copes program. So what I hope to achieve today on our talk are some of these objectives. One, to understand the disaster timeline and common community disaster reactions. Two, to recognize that emotional, physical, behavioral, and cognitive reactions are common before, during, and after a disaster. And three, to identify emotional regulation techniques, the 8 dimensions of wellness, and also go over self-care practices. So about Virginia Copes. Virginia Copes is a federally funded mental health warm line that is part of the state and federal response to COVID-19. Our name stands for Virginia, for VA, and then compassionate, optimistic, person-centered, empowering support. We are a warm line, which is different from a hotline, so we do not take crisis calls, and we are not open 24/7. We are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. We have texting and call services, as well as multilingual capabilities. Our crisis counselors are trained in stress first aid, also SAMHSA's core content training, and relay calls, meaning that we can help individuals that are hard of hearing. We also have bilingual crisis counselors available to text and talk, and we are here to support individuals through this COVID-19 pandemic, as well as what's happening right now with the Delta variant. Any sort of mental health, emotional, or behavioral health contents that you are wanting to talk about, please contact us. So first, I want to go over the disaster timeline. This is a bit of a long one, so we'll go over it slowly, but this is how most disasters function. Virginia Copes, because we're federally funded, our grant money is used to help other states in different types of disasters, so man-made or human-made. So for instance, this disaster timeline could be equally circumvented and placed over something like a hurricane or a flood or a nuclear spill. So COVID-19 with this disaster is a little bit different, and we're seesawing between two of these categories, but we'll go over them and I'll talk about that when we get there. So first is our pre-disaster phase. And generally, people are pretty neutral at an emotional level. They're going through their everyday lives. If there is a threat with warning, there can be fear and anxiety present. And without warning, there is also a bit of emotional highs that come when you're potentially in shock because something's coming, you weren't expecting a disaster. I would say COVID-19, some communities, like the medical community, may have known something previous to us, but I think the general population generally heard and was aware of COVID-19 as a pandemic around March of 2020. If you knew about it before or after, I don't know how you felt about it, but I know I didn't have a lot of information at the time, and so I was scared and anxious and worried. And I'm assuming a lot of people were in that state. So then we hit the impact, the next phase where definitely you're experiencing shock and disillusionment in the way of, I can't believe this has happened. Impacts can come really heavily. People could have lost property, family members, their pets. In the COVID-19 pandemic, this impact phase hit very hard for people because people lost their jobs. And then we also saw the stay-at-home orders be implemented, which could cause some definite emotional lows for individuals, especially older populations that were really trying to work through balancing isolation, the need for personal communications with other individuals to promote healthy brain functioning. And now if you take that away, isolation can really cause a heavy emotional impact there. We have lots to talk about as far as the impact of COVID-19 goes, but our next category of this disaster timeline is the heroic phase. So the heroic phase, and when we're seeing community cohesion increase, We're seeing a huge celebration for first response workers, frontline workers, nurses, doctors, specifically in the pandemic, as we are celebrating the successes of them working through a disaster to help the community. Then on our honeymoon, this is the peak of emotional highs, the peak of community cohesion, and the honeymoon period is basically the last time that we'll see a huge hurrah of individuals really supporting one another after the impact of the disaster. So I know I saw YouTube videos of individuals singing to one another from their balconies, lots of signs everywhere reading "Heroes Work Here." A high sense of neighborly helping, even though we were under stay-at-home orders in Virginia. So I'm sure we can all kind of look back and see how that fit into the timeline that we were all experiencing. Then after the honeymoon, as you can see, there is a large drop in emotional security. There's a lot of emotional lows. There's a lot of big feelings. We are now in the disillusionment phase, where I'm talking about the disaster timeline from a community lens, but each individual has their own lived experience, and triggering events and setbacks can happen, which are unique to you. So the disillusionment phase was a lot of, on the warm line particularly, we saw increased calls about people being angry and aggressive and frustrated. We've spent many months at this point in the stay-at-home orders. People are beginning to realize if they have mental health struggles, that these aren't just going away. They may not have ever had mental health struggles in their life, and now they're realizing that they're having anxiety or depression may be creeping up on them. We also, individuals that do have lived experience with mental health issues may have seen their recovery period take a little bit of a step back as they start to be able to try to cope with everything that was going on in the disillusionment period and how they were going to handle this. We're also seeing a lot of state mandates and processes which were trying to help us get to the next phase, which is the reconstruction phase. We're going to go back real quick and talk about the anniversary reaction, which is typically between the disillusionment phase and the reconstruction phase. So the anniversary phase or event would be mostly after the very notable year mark of a disaster. So for instance, 9/11, national disaster that our whole country experienced if you were old enough or living at the time. That had a definitive date of September 11th, which we now recognize as an anniversary date. Same things with hurricanes and floods and other disasters. COVID-19 has been a little bit different here. We don't necessarily have a set anniversary date, so it has been very challenging for communities to do what they normally would do, which would be to organize memorials and vigils, celebrate the survivors, and honor the victims of a disaster. And because we don't have that necessarily single date as an anniversary reaction, that's been a challenge to sort of navigate through COVID-19. So our next phase is the reconstruction phase. And 2 weeks ago, I would have done this presentation and told you that we were in the reconstruction phase, but 2 weeks is a lot has happened. So reconstruction phase typically is after an anniversary, which I would say generally for Virginia has been around March 2020. You continue to work through grief. Communities are incredibly resilient. They build one another up, and it's very recovery oriented during this period. There may be some setbacks. So what we're seeing in this reconstruction phase is we're seeing that setback as businesses are starting to reduce their hours again, and a workforce shortage, as well as the Delta variant, which is causing some fear currently in the community, and trying to figure out if we're going to be reopening schools and which school systems are reopening and continuing to get people vaccinated. So we're sort of straddling this line now between the disillusionment phase and the reconstruction phase, which would have been now different than any other disaster that we could have placed this disaster timeline on. So now we'll move on to how we respond to disasters. So on the warm line, we've been operating since May 2020, and we categorize individuals' reactions based on these four categories, which are behavioral, emotional, physical, and cognitive. So disaster reactions are common. They're unique to individuals, but generally after a disaster, we see a lot of these things, symptoms, feelings, and emotions come up for a large part of the population. So if you're experiencing any of these, there's hope, and they're generally pretty typical. We know that some people may experience these within a year period, but most people recover without serious intervention. Others may need a little extra support, and that's why we exist at Virginia Copes, is to give that support to both people that just need a quick talk and other people that need to be connected to further resources. So behaviorally, we see a lot of calls, specifically around people feeling like they're or experiencing, because it's not a feeling behaviorally, changes in activity level. So you might be feeling certainly very tired, especially after the impact of the event. You could have been lethargic, or you could have been, oh my gosh, I need to get, my go bag ready, or how do I protect my family? Possibly very high energy level, changes in activity levels. Specifically, note that if they are disrupting your life, that's a pretty good time to reach out for help if you see that these changes in activity level have hurt or slowed down your ability to act as you normally would in your home or typical environment. Another thing that we saw is isolation. With the stay-at-home orders, that was definitely helped with people being able to not communicate with others. You may also see an excess use of drugs or alcohol during this period that, again, are significantly impacting your ability to function in your daily life. Emotionally, this is a big category for our warm line. We got so many calls about individuals saying that they felt irritable or angry, specifically during that disillusionment phase, especially about individuals that were worried about returning to work, or angry at how things were being handled. And we also had a large amount of calls expressing anxiousness and fearfulness, or sadness and tearfulness, as you can imagine. And I certainly felt it, very anxious about how to protect myself and my family, and wanting to nurture that and respect guidelines, but also I like to know answers, and answers are really hard to get when everybody is just trying to figure out how to survive in this new world that we were experiencing. So physically, we get a lot of these calls as well, especially during and after the impact of an event. If you were anybody that, let's say around March, May 2020, felt like you were getting consistent headaches and didn't know why, or your stomach was hurting and you're like, not like me, who's lactose intolerant and maybe had some cheese that day, but maybe your stomach was hurting and it didn't really have a cause. You could have also experienced not wanting to eat, or eating a lot because it was a coping skill. And then also, did you have trouble sleeping? Did you suddenly find yourself not being able to sleep throughout the night, or not being able to get to sleep, but not having a reason of why? This could have been a physical response to anxiety that you may have been feeling and not known it or not identified it. And that can manifest in our body in headaches, stomach problems, eating problems, everything that I've just said, and difficulty sleeping, because our bodies are responding to stress that we may have not recognized yet. So those are very common symptoms. And lastly, cognitively, we also get strong reports of individuals experiencing difficulty concentrating or memory problems, intrusive thoughts. Cognitively, this could have impacted individuals and schools, individuals that were suddenly working remotely, or school systems that had their children do online school, because it's really hard to concentrate on what you're supposed to do if you're not sure your environment is safe, right? If you're suddenly thrown into a new environment, you're having to adjust with that. You have all of these emotions thrown on top of it, and you're asked to do a homework assignment or a big project from work, now needing to learn new systems. Your body physically is also responding to the trauma of a disaster, and difficulty concentrating and memory problems are definitely part of that. As I said before, I want to normalize that disaster reactions are completely normal and very common. According to a survey done by the APA, 47% of people have reported that they felt increased stress and anxiety during the pandemic. And we have also on the warm line confirmed that, as we've gotten a lot of calls during our over a year operation run. So the question now is, how do I effectively manage my emotions when I'm faced with COVID-19 related stress? And we can do that in two ways. We can do that in the moment and also preventatively. So first, we're going to talk about emotional management. And emotional management is how we respond in the moment to intense or heavy emotions. And this can look different for everyone, but give it a thought about, how do you respond to really intense stimuli, really intense emotions? Do you tend to avoid the feeling, or maybe place blame on yourself or others? Are you a really rational person? Maybe have some black and white thinking and try to understand, but not necessarily process the emotion at hand? Or are you very quick to jump into action? Are you a fixer? So all of these things have their pros and cons, certainly, but what we're trying to do with emotional management is reduce, as you see in the graphic, reduce that likelihood of getting to what we would say a boom, or something that would kind of push you over the edge. Maybe you popped off on someone, and we don't want that. That's not fun. So let's talk about how we can reduce heavy and big emotions in the moment so that we don't get to that point where we've maybe said something that we regret, or having to take a moment to go cry on the floor or something like that. And there are different ways that we work through emotions, and each one has its own benefits. All right, so we're going to talk about two practice techniques. The first one is my favorite whenever I'm having big emotions that I want to reduce so that I can continue to move throughout my day. I use this technique. It is a grounding technique. And if you're not familiar with meditation and grounding, don't be scared by the words. Grounding is essentially using your surroundings so that you can bring your emotional level, which also, when we're experiencing big emotions, our bodies react to it too. We might start shaking, we might have heavy breathing, or being able to not concentrate, and that disrupts our functioning for the day. So this grounding technique brings you back into the moment so that you're not necessarily panicking about something that's just happened, and it allows you to connect again with your current environment and bring those emotional reactions down. So this grounding technique, the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, is really fun to do. It's also super simple. I do it as an adult, but you can also easily implement this with children. And the first thing you're going to do is name 5 things that you can see. And you can use your hands so that you don't forget where you are on this, but you can just name them out in your environment. Next thing is for things that you can touch. You can feel, oftentimes, if there's not a lot that you can touch, you can feel the clothes against your skin. You can feel your feet against the ground. You can feel your back against the chair. And maybe you can feel the air conditioning if it's a hot day. Then you're going to name things that you can hear. Sometimes there's a lot of stimuli around us, and other times there's not, but there's typically sounds going on that we just tune out throughout the day. And then after hearing, smell, and then lastly, one thing you can taste, which I'm glad it's only one thing because it's pretty much the hardest one you can do. But you can always just taste what you taste like as far as your mouth. All right. So our second practice is challenging negative thoughts. And this one is less tangible. It's definitely a more abstract practice, but I have some examples for us. We call challenging negative thoughts also cognitive restructuring. So meaning if you have a worry, a fear, a thought that isn't necessarily helping you move through a situation, we're going to try to reframe that thought into a way that allows us to move forth throughout our day, which is why this is in the emotional management technique, but it can also be used consistently as a self-care technique. So we're replacing our negative thoughts with more helpful ones, sometimes more accurate ones as a coping tool. So an example is negative thought. I want to participate in an event, but not everyone will be physically distancing. I could get sick. I'm probably feeling with that thought very anxious, nervous, maybe a little bit blaming towards other people because I want to keep myself safe. Um, and at this point, it's not inherently necessarily a terribly negative thought, but that's not necessarily helping you get through the day. So we're going to restructure that, especially if this is a priority that you want to go to because you said, hey, I do want to participate in this event, but this is what I'm worried about. Meaning your priority is, I'd like to get to this event. So we're going to practice restructuring that thought to placing that responsibility on you now to give you power and you self-advocacy techniques. So I know that I'm vaccinated, but I know that I don't have control over all those people around me. And no, that's not fun. I wish that I could mind control and have everything in the world of Kristen, but that's just not realistic. So I know that now if I'm vaccinated and I can't control other people, that I can make the safest decision with the information available to me. That thought restructuring and that practice of doing so will hopefully allow you to be able to gain the skills and start processing things differently so that you're able to, one, do what you would like to do and prioritize that and give yourself, again, more power instead of other people. So those were two not preventative. Those were two emotional management skills. Now we're going to talk about self-care. So emotional management was in the moment to help us get from really, really high emotions to at least to a space where we can make some better executive functioning decisions, as well as get our body a little bit more comfortable and reduce the likelihood of that big emotion happening again. So self-care is now the preventative practice, doing things or setting things in place so that you aren't at that point when you're at that boom stage, as we saw in the graphic. So self-care is often known as bubble baths and taking walks and getting out in sunshine and cooking. And those are all great things. And I highly encourage you to find something that works for you. And if those do, that's great. But we're going to talk about a few other practices specifically on this wheel of wellness. And there's 8 dimensions here. So this is from the World Health Organization that defines self-care as the ability for individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and to cope with illnesses and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. We're not going to go over all 8 today. I just picked 3. And if you have any other questions, you're welcome to contact the Virginia Copes Warm Line if you wanted to go over any other ones. But our first one is environmental wellness. So, environmental wellness is all about creating a safe space where you can be comfortably yourself. And that's not realistic for everybody. We know that people live in unsafe environments, and or that you could be temporarily in an environment that you don't feel is your comfort zone. So, if you have the ability to walk away from unhealthy environments, highly encourage that as a form of self care, because that's removing you from negative, toxic, or unhealthy physical environments. If you can't walk away from environments, so let's say maybe you're in a work meeting, or maybe you live in this home, which necessarily isn't the healthiest, we can do some things like distraction techniques. You can play music if you can. It's important to have a clean workspace as well. That's part of creating that environment where you feel safe and comfortable. And if you can't use that distraction technique, you can't walk away, you can't listen to music in the middle of the meeting, we suggest what's called riding the wave. So recognizing that this is a temporary situation, if you can sit through those uncomfortableness, and then we'll use the meeting example, breathe through it, breathe through those emotions, and then when you have a chance, if you can get up and go to the bathroom during a meeting or afterwards, work through sitting through that emotion and then removing yourself from the situation, taking a minute to do some emotional management techniques, maybe that grounding exercise that we went over in the moment, silently to yourself, to get you through an environment that isn't necessarily your comfort zone. And then lastly, part of environmental wellness and this self-care dimension is to maintain and create a strong support network in your environments of your choice, because support networks are amazing at helping us grow through situations and keeping us resilient, because we as humans are social beings and we need support. So next is our physical wellness dimension, and that includes sleep, diet, and movement. So things that you can do self-care wise to prevent really big emotions from coming up are create and set a bedtime routine. It seems really simple, but it's actually really good for us. You can also potentially consult a physician about changes in diet or lifestyle. Also, movement is a really great way for us to be able to self-regulate through high emotions, especially all that's happened during the pandemic. So if you can do little things like you can do some jumping jacks or even some stretching throughout the day. I know for me, I sit in an office chair often. I have this little pedal bike. Unfortunately, my knees hit it when I try to use it under my desk, so I just have to move it. Small things like that. If you have exercise equipment, you can certainly use that. And if you don't, use some parts of your physical environment. If you can go and get on a walk. Some people don't have weights but would like to use them. I've seen people use water jugs. So movement is really important. And as we mentioned, stretching is also a great way to get blood flowing through your brain and to help us just regulate our body, because when we keep our bodies nice and healthy and regulated, it'll also help us be able to handle more emotional highs. Lastly, the last dimension of wellness that we'll chat about is spiritual wellness. Just want to do a quick disclaimer here. This is not me advocating for any sort of specific religious practice. This is just a slide on how to be able to use meditation in a way that can help us reconnect with our bodies, reconnect with our minds in a non-judgmental way. And I know I've always heard people talk about meditation and not really listened because I didn't really start practicing myself on it until later and found it immensely helpful. So, some tips to do some meditations are to start early in the day if you can. If you can do just a quick 5-minute meditation, and you do not have to do like an hour long meditation to be good at it. And you also don't have to be good at meditation. You can just practice it like you would practice cooking or a sport. It's important to stay consistent and committed to the time that you have set. You want to get in a comfy spot, maybe with the pillow behind your back, maybe on the bed, lying down, or on the ground. But make sure that you're comfortable. You want to breathe naturally, definitely from your belly, so that when you breathe in, your belly goes out, and when you exhale, your belly goes in. Be mindful, which is harder than it may look, but aware of your surroundings, but not judging them. And this is a great opportunity to check in with yourself and your emotions, and it allows you to self regulate better. I have just started listening to guided meditations before I go to bed, and I have found them immensely helpful with someone else talking and walking you through the steps. It's also great to buddy up, and the best part about meditation is that you try to do it non judgmentally. So you have a thought and you let it pass. We're always our harshest critics. So judgment on ourselves is what really kind of holds us back sometimes. So that is our last dimension on self care. I want to ask you if you have any sort of questions or know anybody that has experienced disaster reactions, is still experiencing disaster reactions, someone that may need a little extra support. Please use Virginia Copes as a resource. We are available 7 days a week. As I said, we have bilingual crisis counselors as well as multilingual services. You can call and text us. Our hours are below. And you can also visit our website, www.vacopes.com. Some quick additional resources that should be sent out with this video: Alive RVA and MHAV, Mental Health America of Virginia, are on this list, and they are also both warm lines for peer support. Calm.com and Headspace are great to get into those meditative grounding techniques. The CDC's and SAMHSA's Coping with Grief After Trauma and Coping with Job Stress and Building Resilience are both great posts from those amazing organizations. SAMHSA Wellness Guide has a great self-care list, and it goes really in depth. That's a huge document. And then lastly, I have Virginia Association of Community Service Boards in here. When we have a crisis call, we refer out to the suicide crisis line or our community service boards, which are the entry point for mental health services, substance abuse services, and homelessness in each county. So check out those if you have a question about what to do in a crisis situation. And you have an opportunity to ask questions now.
All right. So it looks like we don't have anything in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and bring it to a close for today. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks to Ms. Kristen Tully for helping us discover more about our world. Please join us next week on Wednesday, August 18th at noon, and your presenter will be yours truly, and I'll be presenting A Look to Die For When Arsenic Was in Fashion, which is a morbid little history presentation that I've done a time or two. So I hope you all will join us for that next week. You can register for next week's talk at smv.org. Each talk is free to attend and is open to the first 300 registrants. Thank you again for joining us today. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious. Thanks for joining us today.